Hi, I'm Joanna Cyprys with Global Nomads Group. I'm sitting here today with two of the founding members of GNG, Jonathan Giesen and Christopher Plutte. They were both part of this extraordinary team that journeyed into the Beijing refugee camp in Chad and shot the documentary Darfur in pieces. Thank you guys for joining me today.
My pleasure. It's great to be back.
Okay, so first off, I just wanted to know, where did this journey begin for you guys? How did this project start? How did it come about? How did you guys end up in Chad?
How did we end up in Chad, Chris? That's a very good question. I think, really, to start off, we were doing a big program on the genocide in Rwanda in the spring of 2004, I think it was. Kind of out of that, obviously, reflecting on what happened 10 years ago at that time in Rwanda. We also started to notice that things were starting to occur in Darfur, starting to kind of just come into the media center, as it were, at that time. We were certainly on the lookout for another project, and we did want to do something in Darfur. And I honestly, I don't know, maybe Chris, you could probably address it. I don't know if we approached Ben Cohen, or
we sent out a kind of just an email to supporters and friends of the organization, kind of telling them about what we were looking to do in Darfur, and then we got a response back from an organization called True Majority, and True Majority is funded by Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, and we worked with their people and came up with a program that was funded by them and produced by us. And I think it was in August of 2004 we flew off to Chad and went on a long journey to the border of Darfur.
I think it's pretty amazing, how it actually picked up. We had a meeting with one of, executive director of True Majority, something like that. I think within 2 weeks later, we were actually in Darfur. So it happened very, very fast. And I think in the early spring of that year, news was just starting to break on Darfur. Obviously, the crisis had been going on for a couple of years before that, but really come into the world's attention was that spring. And Ben Cohen and True Majority really wanted to, take it to the next level. And they knew we were quick, dirty, and get out there as fast as humanly possible, and had the equipment, and dispatched us, as it were.
How did you guys actually get there? There are no direct flights, buses. I imagine the infrastructure isn't what it is in most cities. How did you end up there?
That's pretty fascinating, Chris. You want to
Sure. We took an Air France flight from JFK to Giesen, Chad, and we had a layover in Paris, and we arrived into Giesen, Chad. And I believe Chad recently, within the last 10 years, was the poorest country in the world. And we went there and spent about 5 days in the capital, Giesen, trying to coordinate our trip to the Darfur region, which was at least several days by road, even if possible, and then at least a day or two by flight and road. And we ended up talking to the UN and the French military, and we eventually got on a French military plane that had cargo and kind of got halfway to the Darfur region. And so we flew from Giesen to a town called Abéché, and then from Abéché we rented a car and a driver, and we drove to the Beijing, to the border of Chad and Sudan, and we drove through many wadis and slept next to a refugee camp, which kind of rule number one when you kind of do a project like this is you don't sleep in a refugee camp. You always sleep a mile or two away. But the first night we broke that rule, and I remember driving up, you couldn't see anything because there's absolutely no infrastructure. And you kind of go to bed and you hear people around you, like you hear a camp that's there, and you hear babies crying, and you hear all these kind of noises, and they're refugees, and they've just kind of lived through a terror, and it was kind of awkward to sleep. And I remember one thing is that we had this tent, this big fancy tent that we got from EMS
up the street on Broadway.
Right, and we had our tent, and our whole debate was, should we put up the tent or should we just sleep under the stars? Because wouldn't it be a little awkward that these white guys cruise in their car and have this really luxurious tent, and sleep there. And we ended up just sleeping under the stars in sleeping bags on the dirt.
That's right.
Basically.
That's right. It was an amazing. I mean, we came in the middle of the night, saw nothing. To wake up next door, I think they're in this refugee camp, which was a smaller refugee camp, and I forget actually the name, but I think there were 20,000 refugees, and we woke up like 6 o'clock in the morning out of our little sleeping bags, covered in flies, because flies abound everywhere in Darfur. And it's one of the things that between 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the morning, you're entirely covered in flies. So you wake up out of a sleeping bag, woken up by these flies, and look over, and there are literally 20,000 people, or what amounts to be 20,000 people living in or under plastic tarps. I mean, it was a rude awakening to really the situation in Darfur and a life in a refugee camp. And I think it was certainly my first experience in a refugee camp, at least at that scale. I mean, and the scale was quite overwhelming.
Wow. And once you guys were out there, how long were you there for?
I don't know, 3 weeks?
No, I don't think that. I
What
think we were there for 12 days.
Is it really?
Yeah. Because I remember we bought
actually in the refugee
water.
camp for like 12 days. Yeah.
We bought water, and I think we bought like 120 bottles of water. And we were supposed to have 3 bottles each. So I think it was like 110 days or something like that.
So yeah. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And we had to take everything with us. So when we drove from this town of Beche, the whole truck was filled with food.
Food and
Yeah, we overreacted a little
we
bit.
completely overreacted. We're like, we're going in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's no gonna be no water.
We could have fed a small refugee camp.
And I think we ended up actually doing it. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so
We
then
helped the
once-
WHO basically, or the WFP, I guess it was
Yeah.
at the time, deliver some food, and basically we emptied out the rest of our Land Rover. Gave it to.
So once you were there, you weren't staying in the refugee camp. You were staying outside the refugee camp, but in your tents, in the sleeping bag. Sort
We
of
stayed
camping
at the
out.
organization CARE. They were
Right.
the camp managers of the Bridging camp, and the gentleman who ran that camp allowed us to pitch our tent on his property.
And so how did the refugees react to you being there? What was that like when you first arrived and sort of walking around, looking, moving around? Did they approach you? Did they stay away from you? Were they engaging? What did they know about what was going on and what you were doing there?
Well, I think you're on the Land Rover, you're driving into the camp, and everybody's yelling "Hawaga, Hawaga," which is white person basically, or everything they represented, foreign aid, and they're very, very animated, very approachable. And I think one of the things that was really very fascinating, at least from a media perspective, is how open they were for us to actually shoot, film, take pictures, interview. I mean, they really understood the power of media by actually getting this message out. And so, however uncomfortable the situation that they were living in the refugee, and obviously what they've gone through over the past few weeks, months that it took them to get from their villages in Darfur, they were very open and I think really very accommodating. And under the situation, I was very, very impressive that they would open up their tents to us. Take us into their community. I mean, it was pretty powerful, And they really wanted to get the message out, and that was what I think was such an amazing experience. They really, really worked with us. Very invasive.
And so how did you meet Zach, and how did he sort of become the subject of the documentary?
We met him when we were doing some projects with Ben Cohen and his organization True Majority, and Zach was asked to be a part of some NPR interviews that we were working on, and from that we learned more about his story and continued working with him and documenting his life.
How long were you working with them before you moved right in with the camera, or did you sort of spend time with them prior to
I think we spent time with them before, but as Jonathan could tell you, it was very difficult to communicate with him because he was speaking his tribal language, and I think I would speak English, Jonathan would take that into French, and then French to Arabic, Arabic to
You're right. So
Masalese.
Zach was speaking his tribal language, which was, I think,
Masalese.
Masalese, right. Masalese, that would be translated into Arabic, which was in turn translated into French, which we would take and translate into English. And then obviously we had to go back in the other way. So
it was incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. I mean, not only from the interviews with Zach, but let alone the live video conferences. it's a 4-way translation, or I guess you could even say 8-way.
What were your intentions in shooting the documentary? What were you trying to convey to an audience? What were you trying to show people?
We thought we could make a lot of money off of the documentary.
Yeah. We've been pretty consistent here at GNG making money. Huh?
I think, with all of GNG's documentaries, it's a way for us to broaden the audience that learns about the work we're doing. We have our video conferences, and then being able to repurpose these documentaries allows for much greater reach, and other people are able to learn about the issues that we're addressing here at GNG, and we're able to spread our work.
I mean, consistently through all GNG documentaries or any type of post-produced work, I mean, it's really putting a human face on a situation like Darfur, like Iraq, any other different programs that we've done, but really putting a human face on it and taking it down at that human level. And Zach, was a very charismatic, engaging young man who had a story that was incredibly powerful, and I think it represented the entire crisis as a whole. I mean, if you want to take it through the eyes of one person, I think he was a very, was a key character in delivering that message.
Okay, let's switch gears up to the video conferences. Tell me a little bit about that. I guess on what point in the time were you there did you do them, and how many did you do? What schools in the U.S. were you reaching out to? What was going on with the video conferences?
How many video conferences do we do? We just did one. That's right. The vast majority of the time, as we'd said before, is kind of NPR, Voice of America.
We did do another video conference for them, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And we had, there's various experts. There were all sorts of pundits at the time that were, talking about Darfur, like Pendergrass. There's
Susan Powers.
Susan Powers, right. But the video conference that we did for GNG, there was just one. And to be honest, I really don't know how many schools participated. I want to say 4 were probably interactive, 3 or 4.
Yeah, but I believe there were. I do believe that there were maybe 30 or 40 view only. I remember there was a huge.
And it was
view
pretty
only
impressive,
audience,
given the fact that we gave them absolutely no time to sign up, and it was in the end of August.
Yeah.
It was really like the beginning of the school year, if even. So it was
very good reaction.
It was a powerful video conference.
And how did the people in the refugee camp react to the video conference?
I don't think they even knew what was happening.
Yeah.
I think we tried to explain to them what was going to happen, and I just don't think that they really understood until we were actually doing it, what was actually going on.
Yeah, I mean, the likelihood of them even, I'm sure a few of them have seen a television, but I mean, they came from one of the most impoverished places in the world, which is, Western Sudan, Darfur. I mean, no electricity. They'd never seen cameras before. I mean, they understood that we were doing a broadcast of some variant form or the other, but in terms of, probably beyond that, I don't think they knew it, but they knew that we were trying to get a message out. And they were very supportive, incredibly supportive. And of course, like in all these types of situations, they just have tons and tons of kids, and everybody in the community or in this section of the refugee camp is like, what in the world is going on? There's really nothing to do during the course of the day, so it obviously attracted a lot of attention. And they were, very receptive, very receptive.
And afterwards, have you guys been in touch with anybody in the refugee camps that you worked with, whether it was the aid workers or?
It's a really interesting question. That's a great question, Joanna. Actually, we've been in touch with Langdon, who was at the Red Cross, who we worked with. And he's going to be working with GNG in future programs, helping to moderate conferences on Darfur. And other than that, I don't think we've been. Ben Cohen sent us some ice cream.
Yeah, we got a bunch of ice cream. What did we get, actually? Cherry Garcia?
Something like that.
Yeah. Actually, might have given us a selection of ice cream, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I don't actually remember having any of the ice cream.
Where did you find that?
I happened to find this. I don't know.
No. This is our ice cream delivery. We got 9 ice creams, and the note is, "Dear Global Nomads, welcome home and congratulations. All of us at True Majority were proud of the work you did and honored that you let us be a part of it. After a trip to the edge of hell, I thought you could use a few pints of heaven. Thanks, Ben.
Let's see, what did we get though? Primary berry graham, cherry Garcia, fish food original pint, oatmeal cookie vanilla, cooler 6. Oh, anyway,
How long
chocolate
did
chip
that
cookie
last
dough.
you guys?
A while, I think.
Did it really? I think Mark ate everything.
Yeah, I do too.
That's typical.
Yeah.
The little people. They sometimes like ice cream a lot. They snark around and get in there.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much
Thank
for taking
you.
the time to speak with me.
Joanna, it's great. It's great to see you. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys and good night.